Your nation, your news. One American News Network.
With Kim Jong-un continuing to conduct missile tests, many in the U.S. wonder just how prepared are we for a nuclear attack? Jokingly coined Star Wars by Democrats, President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative's purpose was to form an advanced defense system from space. President Clinton ended the program, but experts say that now more than ever, we need Star Wars capability. Our Claire Hardwick looks at the need for and the specifics of such technology from New York.
So President Reagan started the Strategic Defense Initiative, otherwise known as Star Wars, with the purpose to protect America from any sort of nuclear attack, any missile attack. And this initiative is no longer in place, but Americans right now are wondering, how prepared are we for a nuclear attack? What are our defense mechanisms? If a country like North Korea launched a nuclear missile and it was heading towards the United States, would we be okay?
We would. And one of the reasons, Claire, is that the descendants of Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, today we call it the Missile Defense Agency, it's down in Huntsville, Alabama, and we do have a good layered missile defense in place. It's a little different from Ronald Reagan's conception because it's focused on a rogue attack like a state from like North Korea or on a limited missile attack. So Ronald Reagan had a big idea about recruiting scientists to end the dangers of nuclear war. It didn't turn out quite the way he expected, but he did start the research and the funding for the layered missile defense that we have in place today.
Dr. Rebecca Grant, president of IRIS Independent Research, said that President Reagan had a really big dream and knew that it would take a lot of scientific research to develop. But it turned out the technology wasn't up to scratch at that time in the 80s and further on into the 90s. So there were various iterations of lasers and pebble systems using a lot of small kill vehicles currently in orbit, and in the end decided to perfect the system of a missile hitting a missile, which is a kinetic kill vehicle with a really big smart rock with a sensor and a motor on top of the missiles to hit other missiles.
Well, the plan is there would be an intercept, so let me take you through this sequence. First of all, we watch the launch sites very carefully. When a missile is ignited off its launch pad, that triggers a really obvious heat plume. We see that from space with infrared sensors. Then the various commands begin to put together what they call the missile track. They take data from the infrared, data from other radars, ground-based, and all sorts of sources, and start to track where that missile is heading. By the time it goes up into mid-course, we have a good track and a sense of where the missile has been targeted. So if we see that it's coming towards Guam or Hawaii, or if it's a longer-range missile coming towards the United States, then we begin to cue the assets.
Dr. Grant said the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System, otherwise known as THAAD, located in South Korea, works because of the development of the warheads and also from the development of the radar. And we can trace those developments directly back to the funding and research started by President Reagan under the Strategic Defense Initiative.
They all are in the same family, so THAAD traces back to that family as well. They call it a layered defense because it's basically split into two parts. One is the mid-course interception, and that's the interceptors up in Alaska, up in California, and also some of our sea-based. And their aim is to use a kinetic kill vehicle, a missile to hit a missile out over the Pacific. Then there's the second piece, and that's called the terminal. That's the close-in defense. And there we have Patriot PAC-3, which has been around a long time, and the newer piece of that is THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System.
Fred Fleitz, Senior Vice President for Policy and Programs with the Center for Security Policy and former CIA analyst specializing in non-proliferation, said that while we have missile systems in place, more has to be done.
There are other systems that we're developing, but there's a big problem here. Boost phase is when missiles are most vulnerable. That's when they're taking off, when they're slowest. Obama shut down crucial boost phase weapons that the Bush administration had put in place. They include the airborne laser and the kinetic energy interceptor, and also something called the multi-kill vehicle. We're starting these up again, but since Obama shut them down, the North Koreans may have a crucial 8-minute head start. 8-minute head start in shooting these missiles. I think we can shoot them down, but we're a lot more vulnerable than we should be.
Flight said that while the United States has the best military on Earth and the North Koreans are no match, our military has to be more ready, because investment in ships and planes and advanced equipment has fallen behind, and missile defense has fallen far behind. Flight said that because of sequestration and President Obama's policies, the state of the United States military is not what it should be.
How sure are we that our missile defense programs are going to work?
Well, they're not 100%. There have been some successful tests recently in the Pacific, but I mean, the people who know more about this than I do, I don't pretend to be the world's expert on this, tell me, look, they are still under development. They are fairly reliable, but whether they're going to be 100% reliable in a situation where we try to shoot down an enemy missile, you know, when you do a test, you know the missile's being fired, you know where it's going, that's easy. But when an enemy fires a missile, you're not quite sure where it's going. There are some variables there that we have to take account of.
Flight said that while critics of President Reagan mocked his strategic defense initiative and his desire to build a missile defense program in space, the president had great foresight.
But what we have to do is we have to build missile defenses in space. President Reagan, he knew this in the 80s. That's the solution. It's the best way to shoot a missile down in its boost phase when it's slowest and most vulnerable. Now, the liberals say, oh, that would be militarizing space. Space is already militarized because the missiles go through space. In addition, there's actually thinking now that we have to have some kind of a space corps to defend our satellites, because we think the Russians and Chinese are going to start taking out our satellites. We have to start building space-based missile defenses very soon.
Former director of the CIA, James Woolsey, said that while the United States needs to update their missile defense programs, there is an even greater risk than a ballistic missile or a nuclear warhead. Woolsey said Kim Jong-un keeps talking about and threatening the use of electromagnetic pulse, and has been very explicit that he wants to go after America's electric grid.
We have said in the Electromagnetic Pulse Commission that means probably something if the Russians or the North Koreans or anybody knocked out our electric grid, that would mean that we were trying to function without electricity, and that means without water, without food, without medicine, without financial exchanges, and it's far more devastating than having a nuclear weapon detonate on one city.
Woolsey said the Electromagnetic Pulse Commission put out a report that said because of social disruption due to lack of water and medicine, within the first year after an electromagnetic pulse takedown of the electric grid, we would lose either 2/3 of the American population or, under some estimates, 90% of the population. That's what's being risked with inaction, and the United States is not prepared.
We don't know until it's launched and we see which way it's headed, whether it's headed to the north or the south. And if it's headed to the south, we don't have anything really that we can do about it, except to have shot it off the launching pad, killed it at the launching pad before it was launched. People are generally talking about this as if the only problem is a missile that is launched and has to zero in on a particular point in the United States or in the Pacific, and carries a nuclear weapon that will detonate at or above a specific point, a specific target. And that's one threat, and that would be terrible for whoever is at the target. But if something is launched to the south and detonated above, well above, several hundred miles above, let's say, the middle of the United States, the defenses we have are not oriented toward that. They don't deal with that.
Woolsey said in the short term, the United States has to take out on the ground anything that the North Koreans are preparing to launch in any direction, because an electromagnetic pulse attack would be far more devastating than having a nuclear weapon detonating on one city, because it would take out the whole civilization structure of the country, and it can be done from a satellite.
We have to defend against a number of types of launches against us of both missiles and electromagnetic pulse carrying satellites. We have been more or less asleep at the switch for the last 3 administrations, 4 administrations really, and we've been nodding off. We've been asleep at the switch, and we basically are still asleep at the switch with respect to electromagnetic pulse.
Thanks for joining us on One American News Investigates.